So we can continue to our sub-theme product innovation, sustainable consumer behavior, and nudges. So we touched upon nudges in the previous panel, but now I'm going to reintroduce Tom Kirkham, who is from DAFNI Science Lead and STFC, and Dr. Stacia Stetkiewicz should be online. Hi, Stacia. And also Dr. Ramu. So let's start again with the same round of questions. The first one being what were the objectives, and what was the project about that's regarding this particular theme?
Okay, thank you. During my time at Hartree, we got involved in a few sort of mini projects around this area. Early on, we looked at some blockchain projects and potential use of tokens to incentivize customer behavior. Those projects didn't get that far, but it was interesting to look at some use cases in other domains where school kids have been rewarded for eating healthy with tokens that they've then used to be able to buy discounts from the shop and things like that. And within Hull, in around 2015, there was a thing called Hull Coin, which was people from the NHS, coffee shops were all brought in to bring free goods for people giving out their free time. Going on from that, I think with respect to product innovation, the work we did around abattoirs in the Food Network was quite interesting, particularly looking at how, I know nothing about abattoirs, like probably most people don't, but it's quite interesting when you get into it, because effectively the abattoirs in the UK are quite low tech. So when a poor animal goes in and gets chopped up, quite often when it comes out the other end, it's about 15 different animals and it's part of the product, and nobody knows which animal's gone into what, which is quite interesting when you talk to different vendors. So, well, not vendors, but the National Sheep Association were a good one. So, and this is my knowledge of food. Sheep, I think it's only really got two products, lamb or mutton. But apparently there's loads of different varieties of sheep you can have. And they were really interested in being able to identify and track the type of sheep that went through the abattoir, so they could maybe develop a premium product. So this is a special kind of sheep, an M&S sheep kind of thing, rather than a normal sheep. Plus the whole burger thing as well. So, can have burgers that don't consist of various different animals. So that was quite interesting. And then there was something else that Hartree got involved in as well, and it follows another technical trend like blockchain, was the metaverse. So remember the metaverse, that was a big thing during a couple of years of the Food Network, and there was some initial work done on how consumers interact with products on shelves, and how to try and position those products to try and encourage people to make healthier choices. And then finally, there was some work that was done around COVID-19, different projects around that, and healthy eating, which I think is a good way to hand over to Stacia, because I think you had a few of those projects. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. Yes, so our project was called Coping with COVID, and we were specifically interested in how COVID was affecting the diets of parents as a group that were particularly, impacted by COVID and the various lockdowns. And we were interested in dietary change, both in terms of how healthy people's diets were before and after COVID and during COVID, but also the sustainability of their diets over time. And the coping part of the title is quite key, because we were really interested in understanding why some people managed better than others to cope with the sudden increase in stress, the sudden change in, everyday life and habits and patterns, and potentially financial changes in their lives, and end up with healthier, more sustainable diets, while others did not. So we were really interested in looking at what is the thing that we can learn from this to reduce negative impacts in future sort of crisis situations. So we conducted two surveys, one towards the beginning of the pandemic, one towards the end of the pandemic, and some focus groups in between, to really dig into that question and map dietary change and connect it with potential areas for intervention, including things like green space. How does access to nature and the potentially restorative benefits of that impact on people's diets, etc. So yeah, lots of different pieces coming together to try to understand those kinds of impacts.
So starting with you, Tom, what do you think works well in that area? What are the challenges and what doesn't work well? Sorry, what works well and opportunities and what doesn't work well and what are the challenges around that area?
So going back to the abattoirs, I think what worked well was that some of the members like Ray in the Food Network went out and visited and Sonal and visited abattoirs, not only in this country, but also abroad, and gave a good perspective on the sort of state of the art, which really sort of got the sort of imagination going when it came to talking to people at the National Sheep Association about what was possible. But quite often it was the sort of simple things that they were missing, which had the real potential for improving the processes. And one of those was just using RFID tags, which surprisingly they weren't using. So that was a good thing that worked well. I guess one of the things that we did struggle at in these projects from a hatchery perspective, possibly because of the pandemic, is just timing the staff in. So a lot of the work around people and consumers is qualitative rather than quantitative. So as Stacia explained, there's a big data collection part and interviews and things like that. And trying to get our data scientists within Hartree to find the right point in which they can come in was a bit of a challenge, because they tend to focus on, give us a load of data and we'll get stuck into it kind of thing. But yeah, it was a really interesting set of projects though.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Stacia?
Yeah, things that worked well in our project, I think one of the real strengths was how interdisciplinary the team was. So we had insights from psychology, from social science, from environmental science, from sustainability science, from agriculture, as well as data science, visualization, GIS, and we all had different pieces of the puzzle. And so we all had different theoretical frameworks that we were able to bring in and different angles and perspectives. And I think when you're dealing with these kinds of questions of people's diets and behaviors and changes in sustainability, you have to take that kind of systems perspective where you have lots of different pieces of information coming together, and you don't necessarily always know at the beginning how they're all going to fit together. But I think that we found some really interesting synergies between our different disciplines, and that's led on to follow-on projects and other ideas for things to explore, which has been really great. In terms of the things that didn't work well, I guess one of the main things is that obviously we were studying the impact of COVID on people's diets, but that means it was COVID time when we were doing our research. And so we were also impacted by COVID as a research team in terms of the same things that everyone went through, but changes in, what our time allocation was for different things, people having to take up new tasks, new responsibilities, health challenges, people changing jobs, moving to different organizations, moving to different countries in some instances. And all of that happened and affected the team, but it also happened in institutions within which we were working. So for example, our ethics applications took about 6 months instead of 2 months because the ethics team was also struggling with the impacts of COVID. So I think we were not able to extract ourselves from the situation that we were studying, I suppose, which was difficult. But I think that we learned a lot from working together during such a stressful time, and hopefully still got some really interesting data out of it.
Absolutely. Everyone, I think, had a project during COVID, and we feel exactly what you're saying, Stacia. So thank you. I think we have Ramu back. Yes? Yeah. Yes. So the first question was about the specific project around product innovation, sustainable consumer behavior, and nudges, and also what went well and what was challenging.
So in terms of product innovations, we tried particularly on the vegetable supply chain. The farmers the prices which farmers gets are very low. So one of the thing we tried is staggered production of vegetables, so that farmers can have planting differently, so that they can regularly have the production, so that weekly supplies are possible. That's one thing we tried. But second important issue we tried is the value addition. When the fruits and vegetables are harvested and then they're graded, uh, uh, 40 to 50% goes into the A grade, another 20% goes into the B grade. A and B can be sold in the retail market, but rest of the produce goes waste. And that's where actually the major chunk of losses farmers face with. And also seasonally, there is a lot of times when the price goes so low that even they can't meet the harvest costs. So in these two conditions, to get over that, we try to work on products which can help farmers. So one of the things we tried is the solar dried fruits and vegetables. So we tried with a small pilot and then later on expanded across the state. Today we have about 36 women entrepreneurs who are doing this solar drying of fruits and vegetables. And particularly in this, tomato has a very good market. In India, if you look at the total vegetable production and consumption, nearly 30% area is under tomato. And tomato, except 2 months, there is no price benefit for the farmers. The rest of all the months farmers make losses. So this value addition at the local level and technology which can help them to add value locally and with a better quality. I think these two are very important. Many times what happens is if you get into a value addition, if it is not meeting the market standards, farmers are unable to market their produce also. So these two helped farmers to get better prices. So we tried that. And in addition to fruits and vegetables, we are also on the cookies with millets and then many other products. So the value addition can be a significant livelihood for the women entrepreneurs in the rural areas. I think that's one thing which is quite possible. So when we are trying to look at sustainability in agriculture, we need to look at from that point of view, because today farmers' income from cultivation is very low, but adding on value can be the second source of income which farmers can get.
Perfect, thank you. Since I have you here, Amu, would you like also to complete, just to summarize a bit, this sub-theme with your main tips, top tips for future research and practice in this specific area? I think you mentioned already a few, but just to summarize, what would you suggest?
In terms of policy support, I think particularly from in India, I would say large policies are made based on two crops. India grows 169 crops. All the policies are based on just two crops, rice and wheat. All the support systems are designed based on that. In terms of support to farmers, it is all based on irrigated agriculture. It's only about 30% of the area is under irrigation. Rest of the farmers are completely out of the purview of agriculture. Similarly, tenant farmers, if the land is on your name only, any support comes in. So there is a lot of tenant farmers, particularly women farmers who doesn't have land on their name, doesn't get any support to the any of these support systems. Which brings us to the question, if we have to talk about policies, we need to understand and then do a long-term research on all these issues. What are the key enablers and what are the key barriers which need to be addressed? Second, there are some examples like Millet Mission. Odisha Millet Mission is a great example where they try to look at not only solving the production problems, but also the institutional problems and then the policy problems. So drawing lessons from that in terms of what worked, what didn't work, where improvement are possible, and how we can apply these learnings to other situations. I think this is a big area which needs a lot of attention from the researchers.
Perfect, thank you so much. And Stacia, would you like to summarize with your top tips for practice and research in this area?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to echo what Raman has said about the importance of policy. I think for us, one of the key findings was that people who had a higher level of stress had a diet that was less healthy and less sustainable. And the people who had the highest levels of stress in our surveys were the most vulnerable in society, the people on lower incomes, the people with job insecurity, etc. And so I think there's a real need for research and policy in this area to think about how do we design and develop interventions that support the right people to cope with sudden high stress acute situations like pandemics, like future food crises, like food inflation. But we do have, in our work, we found some ways of managing that and building resilience in that are not necessarily very costly, things like meal planning. And so I think there is a space there for policy to get involved and research to get involved and say, can we test a range of different interventions that might not be very costly and that could be built in some way preventatively rather than waiting until something goes catastrophically wrong and then trying to jump in and put plasters on things when it's a bit too late. So that would be what I hope for.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And Tom?
So I think policy is definitely right up there, especially when it comes on to looking for follow-on funding. So a lot of the Innovate UK, EPSRC and other research councils funding is always linked to policy. So it's always good to be on top of that. And, you know, the early stage of the food network as well was associated with us leaving the EU. So there was lots of interest around supply chains, and there still is, and particularly with the new government in the US, there could be interesting angles of work that we can carry on there. But also the sort of economics of it as well. So we've been really lucky to have some really big industrial players take part in the STFC food network, supermarkets, food suppliers and things like that. And when you listen to them and look at how they produce stuff, and particularly with the multidisciplinary approach that we bring in, we can identify, you know, potentially quick wins for those organisations, which make good solid projects to get started with, which I think have been really successful.
Thank you very much. And I think this concludes, unless someone wants to add something from the panelists. No?
I've got a point, if that's
Yes.
all right. So I couldn't remember a lot of the stuff that I'd done prior to 3 years ago. So I looked on the STFC, I looked on the Food Network website, and it's good. And it's great that we're continuing on the network, you know, after this meeting, after the funding's run out, and hopefully we'll get more funding. But I think it'd be, you know, probably worth thinking as a group how we can sort of amplify all the good work that we talked about today and how we can get that out there. Because there's so many angles that could go off where we could get involved, particularly around policy and research and development.
Very good point.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thinking about what you want to do about millet and thinking about what you said about the abattoir stuff and thinking about what people have been saying of policy change and nudging. The story of the abattoir work goes right back to 2013, before the network,
Right.
engaging with the Food Standards Agency, engaging with DEFRA. It took all those years and subsequent people in different job posts to finally bring them to the table. And we went to the abattoir, didn't we? It takes that long.
Yeah.
I wish it didn't, but it does. And thinking about things you're trying to do, you know, who's going to last that long in a role, in a position? This network's just run out of money.
Yeah.
You know, to try and get these things, good things done that we want to do and the UN said they need to be done. How do you get someone in a position to champion that? You know, and I know the champion, the predecessors, Tim Benton, you know, he was an inspiration when he was head of champion of global food security. He wasn't in role anymore. People go and do other things for right or wrongly reasons, but championing these long-term problems, like getting millet, which I think is a good idea, is going to take that slog. I'm sorry to depress you, but it's difficult, isn't it? And so I don't know what the answer to that is.
So we're very lucky we have younger generations coming up. You mentioned the Kardashians. I would go better and say Generation Z, maybe some more more relevant influencers or content creators. Well, thank you very much.
Again, I'm asking another question. There are a lot of agricultural LLMs being trained to help the farmers nowadays, and especially there are many they have started like Dhenu and Kisan AI just for the Indian farming market. So do you think the farmers will really use those Kisan AI apps and Dhenu app to ask questions regarding agricultural practices and how do they can improve their agricultural methods and agricultural food production, the methods they do. So what I know from Pratik Desai's Kisan AI interview, that he is trying to develop LLM which the Indian farmers will use to get the knowledge base from the research centers. So because you have a lot of experience with the behavior of the farmers, will this going to happen in next few years?
I have on this, I have a couple of issues to say. One is there is a lot of assumption that technology will solve the problem. And then there is also an assumption that all the information which is available at the research institutions is good for the farmers, and it is not reaching to the farmers because farmers are illiterate. I think these two assumptions are wrong. What we need to look for is whether if the information is useful for the farmers can learn it, and AI can certainly help it. But the problem with today with most of the startups is they simply copy the information which is available in the public research institutions, and then they're trying to reach it to the people. And the major crisis which we are seeing in agriculture today is because of the high use of chemicals, high use of water, the wrong crop production practices which are happening. On that, if there is no shift happening, which means the problem for farmers is not about the technology of AI or digital tools, it is about the content itself. The content is not useful, so many of them are not interested. So I think that's a shift which need to be made, and many of the startups should consider that in terms of shifting on the content part. Problem is not with the AI or the digital tools. We developed some tools, and then farmers are happily using it. In India, WhatsApp, if you look at, everyone uses it. If you look at the payment gateways, everyone uses digital payments. I think in India is much larger than even in UK. Even a small small shops, and then even a very small purchases in India are also done to the digital tools. So people learn if the tools are useful. So content is very important. I feel many of these shifts are required in the startups.
Good afternoon, Stacia. Actually, when you said about you studied the consumer and people behavior of how they're taking their food and how they're preparing their meal, there are new products in the market like Huela and others where they say that you don't have to eat raw food. You can just eat the powder to get the perfect nutrients. So do you think this will gain much foothold in the market and really influence people to get away with the food we eat and just eat those powder nutrients?
That's a great question. Thank you. I hope not, if I could say that. But no, I don't think so, being honest, because there is a segment of the market where convenience and time and efficiency is the most important thing in their consideration. But we know that food also plays an important role socially and psychologically in our lives. So when you're feeling stressed out, when you're feeling overwhelmed, or when you want to celebrate something, you know in your mind, just me saying those words probably made you think of some foods that you might eat to celebrate something, or when you've had a bad day at work. We know that cooking for your family and eating together, sharing food with friends and your community, these are all kind of really important social functions of food. So I don't think that products like Huel are going to be taking over the market in that way. They're also very expensive. So in terms of who would be accessing those products, it's always going to be a somewhat limited segment of society, I think, unless they manage to get their costs down further. So I hope we'll still be making delicious meals.
I have a question specifically about nudges. So this is to any of the panel members who want to answer. Who do you want to nudge, Why do you want to nudge them, and how would you go about it?
Yeah, maybe I can jump in on that. One of the things that is following on from this research project that we've been working on is looking at nudging behavior in restaurants and canteens. So I just mentioned about foods that you might eat when you're stressed. We know that people often look for comforting foods in that kind of situation. And so we are working on adjusting the way that healthy and sustainable foods are presented, the language that we use when, you know, you go up to the cafe to order something. What does it say? Does it just say carrots, or does it say glazed carrots, or, you know, words that are evocative of some kind of emotion and emotional state? And can that affect your behavior and encourage people who maybe at exam time, students are really stressed, they would normally go and buy a packet of crisps. Instead, they see something else and the wording catches their eye and it triggers a little bit of a positive process, and you end up eating something a little bit more healthy and sustainable. So those are the kinds of nudges that I think are quite small scale, are very low cost, are pretty easy to incorporate, but have the potential over time to lead to significant impact. So that would be one thing that comes to mind.
I guess you could argue you want to nudge the regulators to do certain things and not over-regulate, but there's discussions around data standards earlier. Maybe, you know, there could be agreements around those.
I just wanted to add something. There's no mic there. Oh, it's okay. Just wanted to add something on language. Like Stacia said, it's very, very important. But also just to flag up some issues in terms of the new EU regulation coming in terms of greenwashing. So language is very, very sensitive. So what we use, for instance, we talked about fuel before. Science has to come hand in hand with claims saying that this is nutrition or this is healthy. I think that's very important. It's a wonderful area to look into when we're talking about language and prompting sustainable lifestyles. That's it for me. Yes, I think we had.
I'm just thinking for the future generation, especially for younger children, how do we help them in this adjustment? Because I held an event recently with young children, and I intentionally had this fruit bowl kept for them, just for them to see what they're going to do. And to tell you the truth, they just walked in and one of them came to me and said, "Can I have a snack?" I'm like, "That's a snack there on the table." And she goes like, "That doesn't look like that's not the normal snack she wants to take." So I had to go and get some pack of crepes and other things for them, and they just eating it and then pack, fruit juice and stuff. So how do we help our younger children engage with this transition? How can we help these schools? Because I think teachers have got a very important role here, as well as parents too. How can we help so that the future generation can start adjusting to the to what is actually should be the norm, rather than what we have now? Thank you.
It's a million-dollar question. How do we motivate sustainable eating? Okay, there's a question in the back. I think there was a question to the panel, right? Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. So anyone from the panel?
I don't work traditionally on children as a population, so I'm not an expert, but I will say that there has been some research done on engaging kids with healthy food in schools. And I'm at the moment working in a collaboration with a local charity to build an edible classroom. So we get the kids growing their own food in school, and then that goes into the school meal, and they have that personal connection with growing vegetables and fruits, for example. And that seems to be quite promising in terms of getting them a little bit more excited about trying it in the first place. Once they've tried it and get used to the flavor, get used to the texture, then that can lead to positive outcomes in the long term. But yeah, as I say, I'm not an expert, but it seems like a promising area.
Hi. I was just going to draw on something. Obviously, we're talking about innovation. I remember in 2020, I believe so now, There was an STFC project that looked at additive manufacturing or 3D printing and the future of food. And I can see that a lot of the work that's being done, it's been done from an organic perspective. However, 3D printing is like AI, a reality that we'll have to deal with at some point in the future, especially in the food space. How do we ensure what role do the current projects, say, for example, like millets, play in terms of feeding into that supply chain? And are there opportunities with the work that some of our scientists are doing in that field to ensure that we are part of that future going forward?
So you're a 3D printing with relation to supply millets?
Or healthy.
Any other
Healthy
product?
3D
Okay.
printing for healthy food.
The packaging side of things.
No. So 3D printing is a type of manufacturing where your food is no longer coming, you print your food essentially.
All right, okay.
And I know there was a project being run by the STFC with someone from the
I think
University
it
of
was
Birmingham.
Lincoln, Simon.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
manufacturing. There was
Yeah.
a lady at the University of Birmingham where she had started 3D printing, and so I could print out, I wanted to print, I could print my cake out with specific calories, etc. Yeah, it is real.
That's very interesting. Yeah. That might be a way to get kids engaged, because my kids they love crisps and they love sweets, but they love making their own stuff that they're going to eat. So if you can make it, I'm not saying it's like a toy, but if it's like a toy, 10, 20 years time, for whoever gets that price point where kids can effectively do that kind of thing, that would be, I guess they do it in a certain way with different shapes, like they can make things out of. But yeah, it'd be really cool, wouldn't it, if you could make your own complex food items using 3D printers as a child. As a grown up as well. I mean, cooking, a lot of super processed stuff at the moment, isn't there? That's a big issue. And I guess if you can do that kind of processing at home and take out a lot of the artificial ingredients, could be really interesting.
Hi, thank you for your presentation on the crisis, coping with the pandemic. I'm just wondering about the behavior of families facing, obviously, this big crisis that we had. Is there a stockpiling? Maybe do you find that, for example, thin goods and then non-perishable goods as well as a preventative or running out of food at home? But also the methodology that you apply. Do you have like diaries, food diaries? Or how do you research on this topic during the pandemic?
Yeah, so in terms of methods, we had in our surveys, people respond about the portions of different types of food that they had eaten in the past week. So we have average information rather than individual daily diaries. In terms of stockpiling, yes, there were some participants who were stockpiling, especially when there were children with specific foods that they liked in the house who were quite picky eaters. So I know there was one participant that I remember from the focus group saying that their child basically only ate pasta. And so when they started hearing that pasta was going to be something that was difficult to get in various supermarkets, it was starting to be hard to find, they started stockpiling it. But that was a pretty small proportion of our respondents overall. I think most did not respond with not significant amounts of stockpiling anyway.
I don't know how this is going to sound, but it feels to me that we are tricking people with nudges and that people should have educated decisions made on the food that they pick, because they're kind of adults. They're not children that we try to trick with nice color shapes and foods. Also, I'd like to be pragmatic. Nudges work well, but for how long? And I have the feeling that it's very easy to go off the rail, consuming chips and cakes than keeping a healthy diet. And coming back to Ife's comment, it's not only educating our kids, but educating families alongside kids, because the families are going to maintain this good behavior on diet. And I don't know how the reality and this way of thinking are coming along together. So it's more of an ethic, not ethic, I don't know how to describe, but I hope that I have transferred my little question thoughts across the panel.
Yeah, there was a thing on calories being printed on menus this week in the news, wasn't there? And that was an attempt to try and get people to make decisions, but I don't know if it's been that successful. And then some other countries do more forceful packaging, like the cigarettes with the dead bodies on.
Still calories, you can have like the same amount of calories from chewing gum or sweet, and same amount of calories by eating like a pie of apples.
Yeah.
It doesn't say, to me, it doesn't say too much with regards to the quality, the nutrients probably. I'm not a food expert, but out of experience.
There's a 5-a-day thing as well, wasn't there?
Just to come in on the ethics point, this is a really big area of research, actually, the ethics of these kinds of interventions. So I won't try to summarize that in 30 seconds. Plenty of people are concerned about the ethics of it, but I think that you also have to take into account that we're being nudged as consumers all the time. The supermarket is choosing what products to put next to the till because they know you will buy what is next to the till. So it's not that nudges are not happening if we don't intervene, it's that the nudges are happening and being shaped by other actors. So the question is not whether or not should we nudge, but who gets to do the nudging and who gets to make those decisions. So again, I think this comes back to what we've already talked about, the importance of policy, because it needs to be a decision that's made in the public interest, that we nudge for public good, or we nudge for private companies' profit, essentially.
Just a quick comment, just to support what Melina was saying. There's a report that came out this week called Nourishing Britain, a political manual for improving the nation's health. So I would recommend that if we have the time, we can go through it. So that particular report was built on interviewing past prime ministers, 1 deputy prime minister, 10 former health secretaries, 6 other former and serving politicians, trying to see why didn't they take the bold step to do what you're trying to recommend. And that report states that most of the time they get accusations of nanny statism. So that's one of the reasons, and they then don't do anything at the end of the day. They fold their hands and see things go wrong. And when they leave the office, they wish they did better than what they did. So they're now making some recommendations on what could be done better. So if you can read the report, it's got a lot of information. Thank you.
Thank you very much.